Welcome to another edition of The Invisible Hand on the Fireground. Today with me is Lieutenant Brett Snow from the Chicago Fire Department.
Brett, I don't have a name for this episode yet because I don't know what we're going to talk about. I honestly have no idea what we're going to talk about. Usually I have an idea of certain fires, but we've talked previous.
Yeah.
And you said that you have a few stories
where God's divine intervention at a fireground may be obvious, and sometimes it's not. And I kind of look at this story, this experience, as being more of a sparing type of an experience. It wasn't like I just escaped something that collapsed on me or anything like that. It was more or less an experience that certainly it was a pivotal point in my life. It changed my life. And it was a story that happened out in Stone Park. Stone Park is a town that it's a one firehouse town, small town. It's in Cook County. It's outside of Chicago. It's surrounded by a bunch of other towns that are primary low income towns. It was a very busy town that I worked in Stone Park, and we logged about 100 fires a year, and so it was an active town, and so the risks were there, just like anywhere else that's busy. And one day it was basically April 27th, 2004. And I was working with a partner of mine who him and I worked together, same firehouse. It was just to kind of back up, it's a side job. So I would leave Chicago and I'd go work at this firehouse for 24 hours. And sometimes I would do 48s. I'd do about 5 or 6 shifts a month there. And so the other guy I was working with, his name is Jeff Bergstrom, and just he's in my mind all the time. Actually, I can't even think of a day that hasn't he hasn't popped up in my mind. There's some sort of a reminder each and every day. And so what it was is he was a paramedic in the city of Chicago, and he was waiting to cross over to the fire site. And him and I worked together in Stone Park, and we were there for about 3 years. And on this day, we were having a great time. It was just a typical day at the firehouse. We were training with neighboring departments, just having a blast, joking around like we normally do. And routinely throughout the week, because at the time I was still finishing college, and so I would take off and go to school, and Jeff would jump up in the officer's seat until I get back. And around 5 o'clock, I had to get out of there to go to school. And so he jumped up front and got his stuff situated, and it wasn't even 10 minutes I was gone. They ended up getting a call for an alley garage, and they pulled out, and they were going up one of the main streets, and they ended up T-boning. They ended up colliding with another neighboring fire department fire engine, T-boning and killing Jeff. And I tell you, I got that phone call. A buddy of mine was looking on the news and seeing them doing CPR, and him knowing that I was at work that day and knew that he knew that I was on that engine. He thought it was me. Calls me on the phone, and he's like, "Oh, thank God you answered your phone." I'm like, "Why? What's going on?" And he's like, "Well," he goes, "your engine just got into a wreck, and I'm looking at it on the news right now, and they're doing CPR on somebody." So I certainly rushed back, and I walked down on the scene, and everybody's still there, and he had been taken from the scene at that time, and everybody's still frantic. And as I walked up, the neighboring town firemen were like, "Oh my God," they thought I was under the engine because I still had my stuff on the rig. And so my helmet and my coat and all that stuff was still laying on the street. And so it was a very pivotal moment in my life, thinking that could have very well been me. And why it wasn't, I don't know. It's one of those things that we don't know why some of us are spared and some of us are not. And so all I can really do in that situation, and what I can take from that is, for reasons we're spared, and to make sure that we learn from this situation, and that we grow from it, and that we again realize that we're not designed to carry our yesterdays. And for 2 years, I went through some pretty heavy feelings of survivor's guilt, and I couldn't get past it. And I was carrying it around. I was owning it, and every time I would think about it, I would just fall, and I just couldn't get past it. I felt a sense of responsibility, and if I was there, Jeff wouldn't have been in that position. And so, but even though we don't know that, there's no certainty in that if I was there, the same things would have happened, but it's possible. And so I ended up having to finally reach out to Father McCrone, which was at the time Chicago Fire Department's chaplain, great guy. And I finally had to set down my pride and talk to someone about it. And so I called him, and we met, and he really helped me get through it. He helped me understand that I wasn't at fault, and that all these things and how life ends up, how things end up, the ultimate final outcomes of things in our lives, whether it's a decision we make, an action we take, is up to God. And we don't have the ability to control the final outcomes. We can just control our actions, but not the final outcomes of those actions. And I mean, it's certainly clear throughout Scripture, and Proverbs 16:33 is we can throw the dice, but it's the Lord who decides how they fall. And I lean on that Scripture all the time, and I certainly help others in the fire service recognize the fact that we don't have full control of the final outcomes of what we do, and when it's searching for someone that we can't get to, or we can't force a door quick enough, or those kind of things that we feel ultimately created a demise of someone. All we can do is just be willing to be in motion and to do what we're taught, and to do and to serve God's purpose, but the outcomes are up to Him. And so to me, that was certainly a divine intervention in some way or another of being spared. For whatever reason, I was spared, and Jeff took my place. And it doesn't mean that Jeff was any less loved or any less valuable to God. It's just, for whatever reason, he chose to. Danny, it liberates you from that sense of control. It's letting go of having that unrealistic sense of us being able to control the outcomes, and be able to determine the outcomes, and we just can't do it. And again, God tells us, in His Word and His wisdom, that we're not designed to carry our yesterdays. In Matthew 11:28 says, come to me, all you who are carrying heavy burden. And that's just it. We're just not designed to carry our yesterdays, and nor does He want us to. And I lean on both of those for sure. And it's changed my whole way of thinking. It's changed my life. That's certainly something I live by, and I try to help other firemen.
Brett, what is your relationship today with God and the church?
First got involved in this line of work. I'm straight out of high school, and I was a volunteer back in the small farm town I was raised in, before I went to medic school and before I got on full time. And just being in school and being busy, working in different fire departments, like a lot of people do 48s at work. They, always have side jobs. And I kind of fell away from going to church. And so, and personally, it's very shameful to even say, but for the majority of my career, God wasn't a big part of my life. And it just, and so, and I certainly regret that, because it could have probably, that whole coming to Christ and listening to His instructions and following His path could have prevented me from a lot of the dark paths that I allowed myself to go down. And so when I look back at some of these incidences at the time that they happened, I didn't really think anything about it. You know, I didn't think that it was a hand of God. I didn't think it was a divine intervention. And you could probably attest to this too, just, you know, by talking to coworkers and being around the fire service for so many years, is we kind of tend to feel like we're under our own power. And a lot of the things that we experience, and I wrote about this too in one of the articles, that a lot of the things that we experience over time in our career, that we start actually questioning God's existence. I did. I mean, I started questioning, well, where is God in this? How did he allow this to happen? How did he allow this child to get burned up? And so for me, I struggled with that. And I started questioning, well, you know, if God's around, like if he exists, where's he at? How is he allowing this to happen? And so there was times where I even started thinking to myself, well, you know, we have a 3-year-old trapped in the hallway on the 3rd floor. You know, God's not going to get him, so we have to. We're here to do that, you know. But then later, as I started to mature spiritually and really basically jumped in with both feet and accepted Christ in my life about 8 years ago, I realized that God sends us to these incidences. I mean, we are here as you know, as God's helpers, as God's soldiers. So us going into the 3rd floor to get the 3-year-old, that is God. I mean, he's guiding us through there. And so I really started putting that all together. And then I started reflecting on a lot of the incidences that I could recall. And I'm thinking, I just started cherry picking things out that happened that, wow, that, you know, this happened to me and I can't even explain it. So the only explanation is it's just God's intuition. It's God's hand on the fire ground. And even in the ambulance, I spent many years as a medic, and some of the decisions I made, some of the field diagnosis I've made, I couldn't have done that alone. I couldn't have done that on my own. That was all inspired. But at the time, I didn't give credit to God. I was taking credit for it. And I had grown to be, I guess, haughty, you know, and so I was kind of boasting about my own abilities, and I wasn't giving God the credit. And I don't think that's uncommon. I think that's more common than not in the fire service and first responders. And I think when we have that train of thought, that way of thinking, we also have to, if we're going to take ownership, if we are going to take responsibility of the good things that we do, the saves that we do, the rescues that we make, we also then have to take responsibility on failing, on not making that rescue, not making that save. And so if we're going to have that train of thought, that mindset, then you have to carry that the next day. And in reality, we're not designed to carry that. We're not designed to carry our yesterdays, and nor are we given the power to control the outcomes of our actions. I mean, it's clear. It's all over the Bible. It's in Proverbs. One of them in particular is Proverbs 16:33. We can roll the dice, but it's God who decides how they land. And so, you know, and so we can put in motion our actions, but the final outcome of our actions, it's not up to us. It's not determined by us. That's determined by God. And so hanging on to that and coming to that understanding, having that revelation in my life, has really helped me rise above all of the things.
You know, for myself, just speaking on my own behalf, is that I felt that this work that I did in South America was kind of divinely inspired, you know. And I just as you're speaking, I just remember I have so many stories of like divine intervention, but I have this one in particular. We had gotten collectively a towel ladder, right, that was being pretty much put out to pasture from a local volunteer fire department in Rockland County. Good friend of mine, Tommy McKiernan, was a chief, and he had this 72 Mac tower ladder, and I loved it because it looked just like 17 trucks original tower ladder. We had an 84 Mac, and it didn't change much. So anyway, I get the Rotary involved, the local Rotary. They raise a few bucks to pay for the truck, and then the shipping was provided, and et cetera, et cetera. But there was a caveat. There was one sticking point about the truck. The boom was out of service, and it's a bit of an expensive repair to repair the boom. And the Rockland Chiefs, Tommy, mentioned to me about, please, whatever you do, don't raise the boom because you'll never get it down because the hydraulics are shot, I said, no worries, Tommy. So I told the chief in Ecuador, I said, listen, I have this great tower ladder. The only thing is, it needs repairs. He says, don't worry about it. Just send it down. I said, really, it's a big repair. It's the boom. And no, just, we want it, send it down. I said, all right, whatever you want, so I made sure I never raised the boom. I drove it down to the docks. I put it on the ship. And a few days later, I get a phone call, or I forget what the method was back then to talk. I don't know if it was I don't think we had Skype back then. It was like 2003 or 4, whatever. And they're all excited, and they're sending me pictures of the truck, and the boom's up, and they're flying it. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? I said, don't fly that thing. And it's, no, it works great. They're flying it, they're raising it, they're rotating it, they're extending it, they're lowering it. It worked perfectly. Now, it left the port in disrepair. Like, there was no hydraulic.
So, Brett, do you have any other stories you could share with us today?
Some other stories is, some of them are just, God, even at Fireground too, Danny, sometimes it's just, it's about God, opening our eyes to something. It's about letting us, or bringing visibility to something that we may not have seen. And he helps us see. And I have 2 incidences that I look back and I think, man, there was no other reason other than the hand of God. And one of them was an industrial building, and I was detailed from squad 2 to squad 1 downtown, and we had a huge industrial building, and it was there was a fire in the basement, big huge chimney. You could see smoke coming out of the chimney, so we knew it was pretty much below us. And I was in the rear forcing these doors, and they were fortified. I mean, we had the spreaders back there. It was just crazy. We finally got in, and I forced one of these doors, and I knocked out some panels. One of them was a panel door, and it was rigged up with 4x4s inside. Just all those home shift burglar systems. And I got in and forced the door, and it was me and another guy standing back there I was standing back there with 2 or 3 other guys, and we got the door open. And we were getting ready to rush in, and smoke was just to the, from the cover the entire door frame, right? So from top to bottom, smoke was just coming out. And so we were getting ready to go in, and before I crossed the threshold, the smoke lifted and pushed away from the door frame just enough for me to see that it was a 20-foot fall because they had removed the stairs. And as soon as that happened, I seen that there was no staircase, and it was going to be a pretty significant fall. I stopped the guy from going in. I grabbed him, I stopped him. And it was one of those things, one of those moments. And in 10 years, even 10 years down the road after that, he come up to me and thanked me for basically saving him from a 20-foot fall. And just those kind of moments that I realized, wow, that was certainly divine. And another one, I was on the roof and got to the roof, and I was, how they have dormers on these pitched roofs, and for the most part, the dormers will run from front to back all the way, the whole roof line. And we're laddering the roof. It was dark, and I got up there, and smoke was coming up over the eaves, so it was filling up the roof line of smoke, so it was very hard to see. I stepped off the tip of the ladder onto the roof, and normally it's kind of just, you get on there, you sort of sound it and assess it, and then you just head back to where you need to put the hole. And I was getting ready to take a step, and this is we were 3 stories up. It would have been a pretty significant fall. And again, I was getting ready to take a step, and the smoke just it just lifted, and it made the roof crystal clear visibility. I mean, it was just clear as day. And I seen that the roof ended. There was no, it was only like maybe a 5-foot section of a dormer. And I couldn't tell that. I couldn't see that until that smoke lifted. And I'm like, man, it stopped me right in my tracks. And I'm like, wow. And it just, one of those things that just went right to my mind that would have been a 30-foot fall, you know, and had that not have happened, you know. You know, and another, certainly another story was something that amazed me. And this was certainly involved the hand of God.
Brett, what was that other fire you wanted to tell me about on the roof?
It was started by roofers, and they were fixing the seam of a rubber roof. And of course, I'm sure you've been on a ton of those. It's just a common thing. And it started the seam and underlayment on fire. And so we were called for that. We had walked inside the building at first to kind of see what was happening, and noticed that the smoke was way up there. And so we went around the building and laddered it. And we were standing on the roof, and one of the guys from the truck 32, Jimmy Miller, he was standing up there, and he's a longtime truck guy, great experience. And so I followed him up the ladder with a hose line, and I was standing right next to him, about 5 feet or so. And he was making the cut, because it had to be cut and lifted so I can hit with the water. He was standing there making the cut, doing what he normally does. And then crack, he fell. And when I heard that crack, and he kind of like, it was like slow motion, and I could just see him. It was like slow motion, where he was just trying to, you know, instantly figure out, like, almost like he knew this was not good. You know, he knew that this was going to be the end of him. And if I was, it's like he went in this whole, it just seemed like he was going in slow motion, slow enough to where I could have just lifted him out of it. But he went certainly faster than what my eyes were telling me. But it seemed like 5 minutes to hear his axe hit the solid concrete, and he fell 54 feet. And during his fall, and even talking to him afterwards, after he came out of his coma and stuff, he said, Brett, he goes, it just felt like slow motion. He said it felt like he was just out of a body, and he felt like he was just being carried. He said he felt like he was just being carried to the ground. And on the way down, he hit a conduit that was off of the wall, off the inside of the wall, about almost a foot. And on the way down, he caught that conduit and slowed his fall down. He was about 25 feet down, slowed his fall. Basically, it stopped him. He sat there for a second on that pipe, and then kind of flipped off, and then fell the rest of the way and landed on his feet, but shattering his feet and you know, shattering part of his spine, and luckily landed on his feet. But it's just one of those things that there's just no other explanation to that. And there just isn't, to me. And once that happened, and I'm looking at the roof, and once I did an assessment of that roof, which I certainly should have prior to getting on there, there was no reason there was no reason that we all didn't fall through the roof. I mean, it was a rotted roof. You can see in between the joints. There was just no reason that we should have all fell through the roof. And it was just Jimmy. And once that happened, of course, we all got off the roof. But to me, that was God just bringing him to the ground, and it was just amazing to me that he survived that.
You know, Brett, you're talking about these roof stories, and I have a few myself. But you know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking like stories are just popping into my head. But last week, Bobby Holton was on, and we were discussing the whole hand of God. And I think it comes in sometimes different forms, right? There's the form where we have this knowledge, we have this intuitive wherewithal to avoid whatever situation. Is it based on experience? Yes. You know, I don't know how to quantify that, or how to define that, but you know, again, that we have that ability
has to come from somewhere. But there are times that I do agree that there's just God directly intervenes, and
Yeah.
as you're telling that story of the roof, we had a story in week 3. Kerry Murphy fell off a roof. I was at the fire, and very similar story. He slowed down at the end, and he wound up landing in a just by fortune. There was like 1 story's worth of rubbish in the shaft, and he landed on the rubbish and whatnot. But as you're telling that story, it called to mind another fire that I was at. It was the same type of fire. It was industrial, and I think it was vacant. I can't remember now. It was like a machine shop, and I remember there being a loading dock, and I remember myself and another guy, I think this guy Kenny, and we were second due truck, and we weren't sure what happened to the first due truck. We couldn't find them. It was a big warehouse, so they could, I don't know where they were. But anyway, we kind of knew where the fire was, so we started working on these 8-inch cinder blocks, right? Because the cinder blocks kind of were in place of where the old garage doors would be. And we're banging away, and we're trying to make an opening for the engine. The engine's, by this time, has their 2.5, and they're waiting to go in with the 2.5 and, knock down the fire. And it was a good fire in there. It was a heavy amount of fire. It was a good body of fire in there. So I remember as I got the opening, I did maybe 3 feet wide by 6 foot high, whatever. And we duck in, and there's fire everywhere, right? The fire is just rolling along the ceiling. It's like a good body of fire, but there was so much fire that you could see. You follow, like it wasn't like it.
Sure.
It wasn't like it was like smoke and it was obscured and heavy heat. It was high heat, lots of fire, but no smoke.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like seeing this kind of figure. It was like black, like just drop from like the ceiling was probably 20 to 25 feet high. And as the figure dropped down, the fire now went through the vent hole, and it comes roaring out of this hole. And I remember the chief was in the street, and he starts, he's frantic. He's like, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. We have a fireman, through the roof and whatnot. And immediately my partner and I, we just head towards what we saw dropped. And maybe 25 feet in, the engine's knocking down the fire around us. And I see this figure come out of like, it was something like out of a movie. Like he just came out of the abyss, and his face is all burnt up. His helmet's on backwards, and he's like, kind of looked like he was wobbling. And I just grabbed him and escorted him outside. And the engine went in, and I guess they knocked down the rest of the fire. But what was really interesting, and where I really feel this was like the direct hand of God, was that there was a homeless guy living in the garage, in the warehouse. And amidst all the metal machinery and pike pole, all these poles and whatever, there was a bed, one bed, literally one bed. It was whatever a bed is, 6 feet by 3 feet, whatever it was. And this guy, he fell straight down onto the bed. He missed all this machinery, went right through the fire, everything. And, he just literally walked out, and like, what are the odds of this massive warehouse filled with machinery that he falls and hits that bed?
There is, that's amazing. There is no other explanation. It's not just chance, right? I mean, that's divine. I mean, that is without it. Too, Dan, I think it is. It's just there are a lot of close calls for sure. I mean, we experience it. I mean, the job's dangerous. We're not working at Chase Bank. It's dangerous, right? So it has its inherent dangers. But at the same time, I think that, and I certainly believe that we're given certain intuitions at the right time. We are inspired, or we are encouraged, or we are nudged to do this and do that and go here, and not even really knowing why we're doing that. And I think and to me, that is a lot of what happens on the fire scene when we're talking about divine intervention. Is it may not be an obvious thing. It may not be someone who's held, or may not be someone who has moved away from something collapsing. It could very well just be a decision that we make that was inspired by God himself. And even like a situation where we had a Greystone, it's a Six Flags Greystone, it fired up in the top floors, it's blowing out the window and it was pushing in the staircase. And we were sent, we weren't even supposed to be there. We're third engine to just a two engine, 2-truck fire. And they ended up sending us anyway because another engine was close, but we just went anyway. And we pulled up and they were already getting let out to the front and going up the staircase. Well, there was so much fire pushing down the staircase, it made them, they were fighting to get up there to the unit on fire. And so we really didn't have anything to do. So we're like, you know what, let's just go around to the back, So we walked around to the back and I just had something in me that I'm like, you know what, I'm going to run upstairs real quick and check the back door of that other unit. And so I went up there, the whole staircase is filled with smoke, and I kicked open that door across on the third floor, across from the fire unit. And there were this apartment was heavy filled smoke, floor to ceiling. And I just was able to have just some sort of a glimpse of someone laying there. It was a lady laying at the back door where she had been trying to get out, and she was overcome by smoke. And so we drug her out of there and she kind of came to, we helped her down. One, we weren't supposed to be there. And two, if we would have waited any longer, or if anybody else would have waited any longer to get back there to her, she wouldn't have made it, And again, there was really no reason for us to be there. And so it's just those kind of things that, why was I inspired? Why was I, why did I have that? Why was I compelled to run up those stairs and just check that other unit, at that particular time? And so I truly believe it, Danny, that we are given these insights and being directed to do certain things, and even not even really knowing why, and that's my take on that. And I truly believe that.
I have all those stories. Like, I could just quickly tell you a story where I came out of a bulkhead one time, and just by a sheer luck, or whatever you want to call it, I decided to step left instead of stepping right. If I had stepped right, I would have went right over the bulk. There was no parapet wall, and it was a 5-story drop. And I literally have tons of those stories.
Yes.
And
right.
And sometimes it's just your gut. Sometimes God really does directly come down and intervene on our behalf, because he has to, or he sends his helpers or whatever. But there's sometimes that feeling that we get inside, that whether it's based on knowledge or experience or whatever, or just a gut feeling, I would just say go with it. If a young firefighter asked me, don't fight it. Don't fight those feelings. If you feel like you're compelled to do something, it's probably a reason.
Yes. Right. I agree. Yeah, it's even Proverbs tells you that don't depend not on your own understanding, right? And seek his will for all that you do, and he will show you the way. And that was without a doubt. We can't always assume that we know the right thing to do. We can't always assume that that we know how to do it, or that we're going to get the job done under our own power. And like you're saying, just trust God. And Joshua 1:9 is be strong and courageous, and do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God is with you wherever you go. Trust him, and I think you're right, Danny. I think that's certainly great advice.
Absolutely. So, Brett, I think it's really been a true blessing to get to know you on this, and you sharing some of your experience and some of your faith with the rest of us. And I guess with that, I'll kind of wrap it up. Until then, we'll we'll see you again next time on the Invisible Hand from the Flyground. And Brett, again, thanks for being here, and see you.
Yeah, no, I tell you, I loved it. I mean, it was certainly, it was certainly a joy to be able to do this, and I thank you for the opportunity. And it's always good to have an opportunity to lift God's name up and help build His kingdom, and I love that, and I commend you for what you're doing, and all the prayers to you.
Thanks, Brett. See you again next time. Ciao.
You got it. Thanks, Dan.
Have a
Sure.
good one.